In Florida, the governor is threatening the salaries of school administrators for defying his mask mandate executive order. While here in Texas, Governor Abbott has threatened fines and is going to court to enforce his mask mandate. Governor Abbott is also in court seeking to arrest Democrat legislators who left the state to break the quorum in the special session. We'll talk about the legal road for both of those issues this morning. Brian Weiss is the KPRC2 legal analyst. Also joining me this morning is Professor Kellen Zale, associate professor at the UH Law Center. Professor Zale, let me start with you and ask you this question. You know, Texas is being taken to court by several counties. Those counties are saying that the governor has overstepped his boundaries in ordering the executive order. Are they right?
So they are making a legal argument that does have some support, and we'll see how the courts rule on it. They're saying that he is acting, and he is purporting to act based on the authority the state legislature gave him under the Texas Disaster Act. And the language of the Texas Disaster Act, there are arguments that he does not have the authority under the act to take away what would be the pre-existing authority local governments should have to protect the public health. So that's the argument that the counties and cities are making.
How long of a process might this be as it works its way through courts?
So right now, what they've gotten, a couple of the different judges have granted TROs, temporary restraining orders, and those last 14 days at the most. And so those have been immediately appealed by the governor's office because they were granted to the local governments. And so those are being immediately appealed. So that's, you know, on a fast track to the appellate level. And we will see, you know, how fast this moves to the courts, but it is moving on a fast track, and it will most likely get to the Texas Supreme Court fairly soon.
And if it does get to the Texas Supreme Court, what is the likelihood that all of the, quote, Republican justices will decide this based upon interpretation of the law and not political bias?
So again, that's their duty to do exactly what you just said, interpret the law. We do have elected judges in Texas, and so that is always, you know, I guess a concern. But the judges, you know, they take their role seriously to interpret the law. So they will be looking at the Texas Disaster Act, and we'll be looking at that statutory language and whether, you know, it does give the governor the powers he purports that it gives him, or whether, you know, he has overstepped and the language is not as broad as he thought, and that he cannot take away the pre-existing authority that the local governments would otherwise have to take actions to protect public health.
Well, another legal battle going on involves a state legislature against Democrats who left the state a month ago to keep Republicans from passing what they say are restrictive voting laws. The Texas House Speaker signed arrest warrants for those Democrats, and they suggested that the law enforcement tracked them down. The Texas Supreme Court affirmed the governor's authority to order those arrests. Brian Weiss, I want to ask you, State Rep Gene Wu was in court last week to avoid being arrested. He did something to avoid that temporarily. Supreme Court has come back and said, well, not so fast. What's going on in that category?
Well, to kind of break it down, Cam, they say that when you go to the track, the race doesn't go to the swiftest, but that's pretty much how you should bet. And when it comes to the Texas Supreme Court and Democrats and Republicans, with all due respect, it certainly seems as if the Republicans are the Harlem Globetrotters and the Democrats are the Washington Generals. I think this case is no different. I think ultimately, while Gene Wu stepped out of harm's way momentarily in Judge Chris Morton's court the other day, ultimately the justices at the Texas Supreme Court are going to find that this is a so-called political question. It almost reads like a law school exam question or something we learned about in civics, separation of powers, that the legislature has the inherent authority to make its representatives come to work. And failing that the Sergeant at Arms has the right, in Texas as in 41 other states, to order their arrest, to bring them to the chamber to do their jobs.
This could be very sticky, could it not, with all of the representatives who are out? And if the Sergeant at Arms group decides to actually go and try to arrest these folk?
And that's a great point. Look, nobody thinks that separation of powers shouldn't be the law of the land. When it comes to the schoolyard, you've got 3 kids, all of whom want to be the toughest. The judiciary, the executive, and the legislative branches. And this is one of these unique situations, Cam. again, where I don't think anybody could have envisioned it, where you've got this competition, this head-to-head battle between the executive branch, the legislative, and the judiciary, all coming into conflict. But I think ultimately what will happen is that the Texas Supreme Court is going to find that these Democratic state representatives, as a matter of constitutional law, have to come to the chamber ultimately to do their job. And if they're unwilling or they're unable to do so, the inherent authority that the Constitution vests in the legislative branch means that they can be taken into custody, brought to the chamber, and made to do what the Constitution requires, oddly enough, their jobs.
Professor Zale, I got a minute left. If that's the case, if that turns out to be the way Brian talked about, the Supreme Court, it's not the kind of Supreme Court you'd want. Theoretically, I mean, you want a Supreme Court to deliberate based upon just the law and not political bias. His contention is that there really is political bias here.
So again, I take the justice's duty at the I guess I would say, maybe good faith. I have a more good faith attitude towards their duty. And again, it is a slightly different question. He mentioned that issue is a political question, which is actually a different thing. The issue that they'd be resolving in the local mask mandate question and the governor's executive order is a statutory interpretation question. That really is the core role of the courts. And so that's what they do. And so, that's we can look forward to them hopefully, doing their role in a nonpartisan way.
Love that optimistic attitude. We appreciate that. Professor Zale, Brian Weiss, thank you so much. Hopefully our viewers have a better understanding about what's going to be going on. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you.